Are you playing like yourself, or are you trying to play like somebody else? Now, this past fall, I was working with a softball catcher. Now, she had recently switched teams because the team that she had been playing for, she didn't like the coach. It was a very negative coach and a tough experience. So she'd moved teams and she was feeling a lot better, but the effect that negative coach had on her mindset was still there. So that's what we were really working through. Now, I was walking her through an exercise one day, and it was an exercise where she and I were trying to figure out her good games versus her bad games to identify her peak performance mindset. And that's what we'll be doing in this video, trying to identify what is your peak mindset. As we were identifying her good games, some similarities became very clear. She was honestly doing a lot of stuff behind the plate. And now what I mean by that is she was having a lot of extra movement. She was walking out. She was yelling at her teammates in a positive way. She was yelling out the outs. She was just moving a lot, and she was really taking command of the game. What was interesting, though, was that one of the first games that she played with her old team, so the coach that was more negative, he yelled at her because she was having all this extra movement, doing all this extra stuff, and he said it was a waste of time. She was wasting time back there by not just catching the ball, throwing it back to the pitcher, and she didn't need to be doing all this other stuff. Now, I'm not a softball coach, so maybe she was wasting time in some people's eyes. However, when she then tried to be a little bit more robotic and not do any of this extra stuff, what happened was she lost her confidence because she wasn't taking ownership back there of herself playing catcher. She was trying to play like somebody else, or specifically the way somebody else wanted her to play. So then she started to find herself playing tense, and what honestly developed were the yips, and that's one of the first things that we were working on were the yips. And then we started working on getting her to be able to have more confidence, which we were able to do once we got her working on playing the game the way she wanted to play her game. So that's what I want to help you do. Play your game the way you know you need to play the game, instead of trying to play like somebody else or the way somebody else wants you to play. Because when you play like somebody else, you end up playing out of your comfort zone, not in a good way. You want to be pushing yourself out of your comfort zone as an athlete, but when it comes to game time, that's a time for you to be completely comfortable and in the flow. Now, I want you to think back to a game where you wouldn't say you played very well because you were really tense and you were under a lot of pressure and you weren't very comfortable. When you think about that game, I want you to now compare it to a game where you were absolutely comfortable, feeling confident, and I'm guessing performing your best. Think about the difference between those two mindsets. When you're tense and when you're rigid, stiff, you're uncomfortable, that's the kind of mindset that you'll get into when you're trying too hard to play like somebody else, because you are taking yourself out of your natural flow and your natural rhythm in which you compete. That's exactly what this softball catcher did when she was trying to play the way that her coach wanted her to play. She wasn't doing all the extra movements, and she wasn't taking control and taking ownership back there behind the plate. So how can you find this true self, right? This way that you need to be competing out there from a mental standpoint as an athlete. There's a really fantastic exercise that I like to do. And so with this exercise, it's summed up through 4 different steps. The first step is you want to list out your worst 3 performances. With this part of the exercise, what we're doing is we're getting a very clear idea of the mindset you don't want. It might seem kind of funny to identify the mindset you don't want, but it's so easy to get caught up in playing the way somebody else wants you to play if you're not clear on what actually hurts you. Another great example of this is a basketball player that I worked with whose coaches kept telling him, you need to have that killer mindset, you need to be mad when you play. The funny thing was, he wasn't a very, aggressive person. He was a very kind kid. It just wasn't very easy for him to get into this aggressive mindset. And the truth is, he didn't need to be in that aggressive mindset because he played his best games when he wasn't in that aggressive mindset. When he tried to, have that killer mindset and be mad when he played, it distracted him. So if it distracts you when you play a certain way, even though somebody else tells you that that's the mindset you need to have or that's the way you need to play, the evidence points to no, you don't need to play that way because it distracts you and it actually holds you back. So you want to first identify what are your worst 3 performances. And then step 2 is you'll list out your 3 best performances. Now we get to look at, what were the performances you had when you were performing your absolute best? And then start to think about what was your mindset like? What were you thinking about? What were you focused on? Step 3 is you want to write out your peak mindset statement. What this statement will be is a summary of the mindset you had for those 3 really good performances. An example of this would be wanting to prove myself or wanting to prove the other team wrong. Or it might be feeling relaxed and having fun. Really get clear on what is that mindset that you want. Because the truth is, I've worked with many different athletes, and some of them perform their best when they're trying to prove that other team wrong. So we have to work on getting them to almost create things in their mind that make them mad at the other team so they can prove them wrong. I've also worked with many athletes who need to be absolutely relaxed and having fun and take all the pressure off of themselves, right? And I've also worked with athletes who play their best when they're competing against themselves. So it's a more internal perspective, right? I'm competing against the time that I had the other day. So it's a more competitive state where they're always trying to challenge themselves. So I want you to create this peak mindset statement, because when we come up with a statement for ourselves, it reminds us in a very simple way of the mindset that we need going into a game. And then step number 4 is you want to think about how you can get into that state. This brings me back to the softball catcher example. We weren't exactly talking earlier about a mindset statement that she had. We were talking about actions she takes. Because for her, it was about taking ownership of the game and feeling comfortable back there behind the plate. The way she got into that mindset was through these different actions that her coach considered a waste of time. So for yourself, for this last step, now that you have your peak mindset created, your peak mindset statement created, think about what are the actions that you need to be taking, or what is the way that you need to be playing out there to help yourself get into that mindset on a consistent basis. Now, in addition to identifying your peak mindset and figuring out what you need to do physically out there, a big part of getting into that mindset will be a pregame routine. So what I've done right here is I've linked another video that goes into how you can create a pregame routine for yourself as an athlete. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. I put out new videos each week on sports psychology and mental training.